want to stop and ask me questions as we go along, I'm completely fine with that. And if you want to chat with me about department stores, I'm always happy to talk to you about my dissertation. And I know that I'm sure everyone here has a story that they'd love to share, and that's my favorite part about my dissertation is that everyone I talk to, department stores are so important to them, especially in the mid-century. So please feel free to let me know your favorite stores or anything, any information you'd love to share with me. I'd love to hear. So I thought, of course, mid-century modern is such a huge topic, and I thought I'd start by looking at the origins of really where mid-century modern design started from, and then looking at some of the key hallmarks of mid-century modern design. I know that you guys have really intense training here, so I thought a great way to supplement it might be looking at the beginnings. So when we talk about mid-century modern, I feel like the two people that come up most are Charles and Ray Eames. So I thought I'd open with an image of the Eames house in Pacific Palisades, California. And a lot of the features here are things that I'll talk about today throughout this chat. But you can see some of the Eames key hallmark pieces in here, their shell chairs, their lounge chair, and in their own home. And I think the most important takeaway from the Eames house, which is one of my favorite things about mid-century modern design, which I think gets overlooked a lot, is the fact that livability is really important to designers. And that's something that is really a hallmark of the mid-century modern time period, because the designers are designing for people, for regular people, for a middle class, generally families that are living in their homes and living with these pieces. And I think that the Eames house really shows that even though a lot of their designs were minimalist in a way and pared down, the home itself is very livable. There are plants everywhere. You see the bookshelves filled with books. It really seems like some people live here. So to get our palette sort of warmed up, I thought I'd throw in a couple other photos that maybe are familiar in style to everyone here. Just two, sort of a bedroom and a dining room that opens to a kitchen that again sort of really show what we think of when we think of mid-century modern. So this time period where we see lots of color, where we see lots of streamlined forms, a lot of natural wood, but really pulling it together again in a very livable and a very comfortable way. So I want to start by thinking about the Bauhaus. So the Bauhaus is what we call it. We call it a style, basically, the Bauhaus style. But what the Bauhaus was, it was a design school in Germany. It was founded in 1919 by Walter Gropius, and their vision was basically to unite art and design. So the school, it's kind of the first time we see a modern design school. The school brought together architecture, sculpture, painting, furniture design, and thought about it as a single expression. So again, this is one of the first times where we see all of these different types of artists and designers sort of trained under one roof, talking to each other, learning from the same people, and it really helped to bring together all of these elements and created a different sort of sense of thought in the designers that were working at that time period. So their goal was to abolish excessive ornamentation and create designs that were minimalist in form. So this is where we see, when we think of minimalism, the Bauhaus is really where it all starts. Their idea was to unite art and industry, so to create art into an industry, really. And in 1923, they shifted their goal to really focus on designing for mass production. So the school moved to Dessau, Germany in 1925, and this is an image of the school that was designed by Walter Gropius. So the building was designed by him. Gropius founded the Bauhaus, and then he designed, when they moved, he redesigned the building. And Gropius is a really important person, because one of the other ideas that makes the Bauhaus so important for mid-century modern design is that a lot of the designers there came to America and then became really key, prominent players here. So Gropius actually went on to be the director of Harvard School of Architecture. So we'll talk about him a little bit later too. But this building was 1925 to 26. So we're really thinking about the precursor to what we would define as the mid-century. So for me, I generally think about the mid-century. Maybe I'm a little liberal, but I think the 1940s to the 1970s, that middle chunk of the 20th century. So this is sort of the precursor to that and all of the things that's happening in art and design up to that point. So the Bauhaus, some of the key features of Bauhaus design, like I said, are minimalism. This is a chair designed by Marcel Breuer. Was designed in 1922, and I still think, every time I look at Bauhaus furniture, I still think it looks really modern and really contemporary. And it surprises me that this is 1922. It's oak with wool upholstery, and this one is in the collection of the Met. But what's important here is that in all of the works that the Bauhaus produced, they were really looking to dematerialize the conventional forms of the chairs in any sort of work, in this case a chair, and bring it down to the most minimalist form that it could be. So here we have what really just the shape of the chair, I mean following the lines that you need to sit in, and then minimal fabric for supportive effort. It doesn't seem like it would be that comfortable, I think we can all agree, but what it is it's a form that is really devoted to its function of seating. Whether or not that function is comfortable, Breuer did not really care to answer, but he's creating something that is the most minimal expression of what the piece can be. The other key feature is, like I said, creating beautiful things that could be mass-produced easily. So the Bauhaus designers were really thinking about how they could elevate public taste by creating beautiful things that could be purchased on a budget. I think this one probably is something that we're all fairly familiar with, the Wassily chair, which was actually, it was called the club chair when it was first designed, but they call it Wassily because of Wassily Kandinsky, the expressionist painter who you might be familiar with. He was also a member of the Bauhaus. But this chair is designed in 1927 to 28. The first model was designed in 1925, and it's made from tubular steel and leather. This is also Marcel Breuer. So you see he's working with wood, he's working with metal. And this chair is really important because Breuer was a student at the Bauhaus, and he became head of cabinet making at the Bauhaus. He's also one of the designers that came to America, and he worked at Harvard as well. So he's a really important player in Bauhaus design, but also in mid-century modern. His designs were continued to be used. So a lot of the things we'll see in the Bauhaus continued to be produced. Some of them, this chair is still produced today, and you can still buy it. But they were still, it is expensive. It's not affordable anymore.
It's not very comfortable either.
It's not. No, there's no comfort here, and there's really no affordability because I think it's designed within reach.
It's comfortable.
You think it's comfortable?
It's actually a lot more comfortable than it looks.
I always felt, my grandparents had one, and I always felt like I was like sliding back.
Yeah, the angle was, I never liked, yeah.
Well, maybe comfort is something we define, on our own, but
depends on your size.
for me too, I'm tiny, so my feet probably barely touch the ground at that angle. But I mean, this is something that we still have. It's still an important design, a really iconic piece of design, and it's something that in the mid-century, like a lot of other Bauhaus pieces, a lot of mid-century designers were using these pieces within the interiors that they were designing. So Breuer, he's really remembered for his use of tubular steel, and he was inspired by his bicycle. So all of the steel here is basically thinking about the tubular steel that we have in a bicycle. So he thought, how can I make this material, take it and use it in design? Because of course, bicycle production at that time was something that had reached a different level of mass production. Not the same level that it would be today, but a level of mass production that furniture hadn't quite reached. So he was trying to figure out how to create the same level of mass production within furniture, and using the same materials and using the same production process is really what inspired this chair. He figured if bicycle tubular steel could be bent into handlebars, it could certainly be bent into furniture forms. And we see that here. Like I said, this was originally called the club chair. So again, thinking of the minimalist idea, we have the club chair on the right is actually a traditional club chair made of leather, big bulky chair that you'd see in gentlemen's clubs or in people's own living rooms. And then Breuer's interpretation of the club chair, you can see that the shape and form are similar, but he pares it down significantly, and all you see are just the lines of the tubular steel and the leather. So that's kind of the core of what minimalist designers were doing, and a lot of the Bauhaus designers were doing. They're taking these furniture forms that were traditional, in this case an overstuffed club chair, and reducing it to something that's really just skin and bones and the form of what's needed in that case a chair. So Breuer did a lot of work with tubular steel, and that's something that we see throughout the mid-century, is again the same use of this material because of its ease for reproducibility. This is one of his chairs. Again, probably you've seen this chair 100 times over. They still manufacture it today. And it keeps getting, it goes through phases. It was really popular again in the 80s, and then it died down a little bit, and I think it's really popular again right now at this moment. But that chair is from 1927, and then the tea cart that he designed is from 1928. So we see these forms, again, that seem strikingly modern and contemporary for the 1920s that the Bauhaus was producing. We see them experimenting with different materials and different construction methods to really create these pieces that could be easily reproduced. Another armchair, now this one is by Mies van der Rohe. So Mies van der Rohe is another really important, he's an architect and designer from the Bauhaus that we also see he emigrates to America. And you'll notice sometimes if you look at the Met or MoMA's taglines for these artists, they call him American. So they actually are calling Mies van der Rohe American, which is a little bit offensive because he didn't come here until the 1940s, and he died in 1969. So most of his design life really was spent in Germany, but these designers were so prolific in America that a lot of museums are claiming them as our own, essentially, because they did so much work here. So you'll see him claimed as both German and American. But Mies van der Rohe is also working with tubular steel and also considering these ideas of how to make really beautiful pieces that could be mass-produced or produced at a high level. And Mies van der Rohe's big probably statement piece before he came here to America was the Barcelona Pavilion, which was designed in 1929. So it's called the Barcelona Pavilion, which is a little bit confusing. It's called that because it was in Barcelona. It was designed for the 1929 Exposition Universal, so basically a World's Fair in 1929 in Barcelona. And this was the pavilion for the country of Germany. So this was their exhibition mainstay that represented Germany. But we refer to it as the Barcelona Pavilion now. So this was done in 1929. And at that time, he was director of architecture at the Bauhaus. So he was chosen to represent Germany for this international exposition.
He's Dutch, right?
He's German.
Really? It's Dutch. Looks like a Dutch name.
Yeah, Mies van der Rohe. I don't know what his background was, but he was born in Germany. So he could be of Dutch descent. So the form here is basically what he's doing is he's simplifying the form, and he's really using extravagant materials to create that decoration. So we see the decorative effect here is not in.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Can everyone just turn their phones silent, vibrate off? Thanks.
Just forgot to do that.
So we see the decorative effects are not in added elements. Like they're not in accessories, they're not in objects, they're really not even in furniture like you might think of in Victorian or Rococo pieces, but they're in the beauty of the materials that are present. And that's another thing that we keep seeing in the mid-century is that a lot of the decoration especially in singular pieces of furniture comes from the material that it's made from. So in this case, what I mean by that is if we take a high-level view of the floor plan, it's pretty pared down. A lot of the walls are removed, and you see these really big, beautiful pieces of marble and travertine that, when you look at them within the space, they really define the space. And I have an even better picture. Here's a black and white from that time period. So here's a photo of how many would have seen photos of this in black and white. And you can see the really beautiful pattern of the stonework against a pattern of the darker stonework. And then the furniture in here, these are the Barcelona chairs, which again I'm sure you guys have seen over and over again. a really popular piece in the mid-century as well. But they're designed specifically for this pavilion in 1929, which is why they're called the Barcelona chairs. We have the Barcelona chairs and the stools.
Do you know how it was received at the time?
I think it was received very well. So what was happening with design at this time period was a lot of people were looking towards European design and at the time they called it modern. So this European modern. And it was different. It was different from what a lot of people had seen before, especially in the United States. If you think about design at that time, I mean, there was Art Deco and there was streamlining, but a lot of people were really committed to colonial revival and more traditional American forms. But you'd see, there's a really great book if it's something you're interested in. It's called Selling Modern Design by Marilyn Friedman. And she talks about in the 1930s how a lot of department stores were bringing these modern pieces into their stores and presenting them in a museum-like way, sometimes even sponsored by museums, to show the public this new style of design. So it was received, especially on a high level by other designers quite well. For general consumers, it's hard for people to just leave everything they know and redecorate in a new style. And I think for the most part, for a general consumer base, people might introduce one or two pieces, especially small decorative accessories within their interiors. But still, even though the goal of the Bauhaus was to create affordable furniture, at this point, the Barcelona chair still wasn't something that was incredibly affordable, which we see in the mid-century. We finally get to a point where you see affordability as a major factor in some of the pieces. So I just wanted to show you again just the simplicity of the design here and how, like I said, the decorative effects are just, they're coming from, it's really this beautiful design, and the decoration of the space is really just coming from those the natural stones. The furniture is of course really beautiful and adds a little bit something, but it's not over the top. We don't see vases and decorative accessories. We don't see bright carpets. We don't see that really anywhere in this space.
Kind of looks like an IKEA chair.
I
Like, oh, that's like my chair at home.
It's funny. I
Right.
think IKEA is really the modern ancestor of the Bauhaus. They're designing in this very European modern style, and I think where in America I don't think for the most part we never really got quite that stark. But in Europe, a lot of European designs, if you think about how stark and how minimalist they were, IKEA is a great modern sort of representation of, I think, of the Bauhaus and how it played out here.
I think another thing worth mentioning is, especially with this Barcelona pavilion, how it has these large windows and there's a lot of space and the indoor-outdoor feeling, whereas at that time most people lived in these much older houses, especially in Europe, that had little tiny windows and they were close together. So this is a kind of an added new idea.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, because that is another one of the hallmarks of the Bauhaus design, is the idea of a large plate glass, like a glass wall, which is something that we see now in skyscrapers, is where it's really stuck. But thinking about creating this fusion between indoor and outdoor space and creating a total work that's completely designed to work, again, indoor and outdoor space. And this statue right here, she's actually outside in a little reflecting pool outside. So you do see that the walls aren't really there to partition the space, but really just help gently define it and respect everything that's outside of the walls as well. So I told you Walter Gropius is someone that is a really key player here. So remember, he founded the Bauhaus, and he fled Germany like many other designers did, especially many other Jewish designers. Left Germany. A lot of them stopped over in Europe. So they left under false pretenses, stayed in Europe for a little while, and made it to America. And Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer, they were Breuer was one of Gropius's students. Both of them ended up at Harvard. Gropius, like I said, eventually became director of the School of Architecture at Harvard. So these two and many others started designing in America. And this is the Gropius house from 1938 in Lincoln, Massachusetts. So Walter Gropius, well, he was director at architecture. Moved to Cambridge, and a woman who was familiar with his work in Germany wanted him to be able to express himself in Massachusetts. Lincoln was quite cost prohibitive at that time, and she gave him a plot of land and she gave him money to build this house. It's still standing, and it's a really great place to visit if you ever make it to Lincoln, Massachusetts. It's now owned by Historic New England. They mostly own colonial homes, but they own this one too, and it's a really great place to look at. So I wanted to show you, so here's Gropius's Bauhaus building. So you can see he's taking a lot of the same ideas from that building, bringing them with them here. We see geometry, we see a larger use of glass. Of course not quite as much as you'd have in the Bauhaus, but this would have been a studio building, so a lot of natural light would be necessary. Not so much needed in a private home. But we do see a lot of use, a lot of play in the similar materials. So we see steel, we see modern construction techniques like corrugated steel is what the house itself is made of corrugated steel. So again, that's something that would have been much less expensive as a consumer. So Gropius is trying to make a home here that reflected not only his design sensibilities, but his design principles. So he wanted something that looked beautiful, but was also very livable and also affordable in a sense. And here's an interior shot. Again, so you have cork floors here, which would have been much more affordable compared to something like wood. Tubular steel on the stair rail, some chrome lighting fixtures, and just a really pared down and simplified design. You can see, compared to the Barcelona Pavilion, per se. Now this is a home, so it's a place that would be a little bit warmer in general, but Gropius is starting to create a little bit more warmth than maybe he had in his Bauhaus designs. And again, that's something that we really see in the mid-century, is this idea of creating a space that's appropriate for living, a space that you'd want to be in and that feels comfortable. This is his bedroom that he shared with his wife. And you can see this is not a mirror, it's a large glass wall. So they had their bed here, and then there was a large glass wall in the dressing area, and then behind that is the bathroom. So this space is really reflective of that idea of having a large glass window. But here, Gropius is using it inside to help separate and define those spaces, but also to keep the space really open and really bright. And this is the living room. You might see some IKEA here too. This chair just reminds me of that IKEA chair that is everywhere, that everyone has in every college dorm room. But thinking about the minimalist pieces of furniture here. So we see a lot of tubular steel furniture here. I think these are Breuer tables.